I saw what happened during the primaries, where the people who were running, like Dean Phillips and myself and Marianne Williamson, were just shut out. We were told those primaries are not being held anymore. We were told, they passed a law, they passed a rule within the Democratic Party that after they saw me campaigning very, very effectively in New Hampshire, they passed a rule that any candidate who steps foot into the state of New Hampshire, that all of their votes will go for President Biden. So those were the audacity of the kind of new rules they were adopting to make sure that democracy did not function. And I suspect that's the same thing that's going to happen with Kamala now.
I mean, what's interesting, and I think this is probably supportive of your view of what you just expressed, a lot of the front runners have already endorsed her publicly. So even if it went to an open convention, it wouldn't include the likes of Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer and others, because they've already said they're backing Kamala Harris. So they've kind of talked themselves out of the race.
Yeah, and I think Kamala has a lot of vulnerabilities that we're gonna hear more and more about over the next 104 days. Oh, Kamala, for one thing, Piers, Kamala was kind of the concealer in chief. She was talking every day, according to her own recounting, to President Biden, and she was the one who was coming out onto the podium and saying there was nothing wrong, that there was no problem. And so clearly she was either she was blind to the kind of thing that we all saw during the debate, or she was trying to protect her own career by putting the country's interests secondary. And I think that that's something that the Trump campaign is going to have billions of dollars to put that story on TV. Vice President Harris was also one of the public officials in California who created these policies that made California 49th in terms of education outcome, number one in terms of homelessness. California, 50% of the homeless people in our country live in California. That's not a good record to run on. And I think she has a lot of other vulnerabilities that, that we're going to hear more and more about, and that essentially are going to make her unelectable.
Has anything that's happened in the last 3 weeks, from the debate to the attempted assassination, and I'll come to that separately in a moment, to Biden quitting, has any of that changed how you view your role right now?
Well, I would say that the election now is very dynamic. So, and, which offers all kinds of opportunities for me, but I really, I try not to predict the future because I just try not to spin stuff. So, we're doing what we've been doing from the outset, which is to fight for the American middle class, fight to end the chronic disease epidemic, fight to end the war machine, fight to end this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, talking about and fight to get the deficit under control. All of these issues that none of the other candidates are talking about. I would say that the Democratic Party no longer has any authentic relationship with the American middle class. The Democratic Party I knew as a boy that represented cops and firefighters and working people is gone. And then the Republican Party has all kinds of problems with their own. President Trump, who got a huge boost from the assassination attempt, and I commend him for his courage and his leadership during that very, very challenging time. He announced yesterday, according to the New York Post, that he is choosing between Jamie Dimon, who's the head of Morgan, and Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, as his Treasury Secretary. And this is, I think people cannot take seriously his promise that he's going to drain the swamp if he actually once again brings these swamp creatures in to run our government. BlackRock is American middle class is not fond of BlackRock, and they see, all of the machinations, its role in the war in Ukraine, where it's got not only the contracts because it owns all the military contractors to blow up Ukraine, all the bridges and ports and schools and hospitals, but it also has the contracts to rebuild Ukraine. And, it owns the credit card companies that are bankrupting Americans, that are charging 32%. All of the economic problems that we have, which are the result of this systematic strip mining of wealth from the American middle class and sending it upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires, it's all been orchestrated by BlackRock. And to bring them in to run the Treasury is not, I think it sends a bad signal. I think it's going to be a vulnerability for President Trump. What's troubling to me, and I don't want to make this about me, but we've seen this weaponization of the federal agencies, of the enforcement agencies, including the CIA, the CIA, FBI, and even the NIH and the CDC, in it being weaponized for political purposes. And, I just won this lawsuit against the Biden administration, Kennedy versus Biden. I just won an injunction against the Biden administration using the FBI and the CIA and NIH and CDC to censor me, to stop the censorship. But we've seen it across the board against President Trump, against other rivals of the president, in a way that I think should be very, very disturbing to the American people. Pierce, when my father took over the Justice Department in 1961 for his brother, who was then president, he had a meeting the first week where he called all the branch chiefs and all the division chairs, and he said to them, the one rule in this Justice Department is that no, we never politicize enforcement, that we never ask the question about a defendant, are they Democrat or Republican? We have a responsibility for making sure that the American people believe that in our country, justice is blind, that the enforcement agencies of our country are neutral politically, and that's the only way to maintain faith of the American public in these critical institutions of democracy. So, and I think President Biden really dropped the ball on that. I think, President Trump did too. When he was running, he was talking about, locking up Hillary Clinton and appointing a special prosecutor to do that. And, it's paradoxical that when he got that, now that he's on the outside, he saw those federal agencies weaponized against him in ways that I think the entire country witnessed. But it's not good for our country. We look like a banana republic. I'll say this. I think President Trump's first reaction to the shooting, first his bravery on the podium, and then after that, at least the noises he made about unifying the country, I was very touched by that and very hopeful about that. And I don't think it's necessarily turned out that way, but I think at first, and the first 10 minutes of his convention speech were very conciliatory. And I think that's what our country needs now. It needs to be unified. When my uncle was shot, Pierce, in 1963, when he landed in Dallas that day, there were posters all over the city that said, and in fact, advertisements in the leading newspapers in the city that had a picture of my uncle and a wanted poster, wanted dead or alive. And that was an emblem of this, of this polarization that had come out of the civil rights movement, particularly at that time, and the anger at my uncle in some of the southern states, and his shooting in many ways was a product of that boiling anger. But after he died, our country came together in an amazing way. And, he'd been trying to get the Civil Rights Act passed, the Voting Rights Act. And immediately after his death, as a gesture to his memorial, as a memorial gesture to him, Congress, both houses of Congress got together and passed the Voting Rights Act. And, I really would have liked to see that kind of unity and our country became a true constitutional democracy for the first time in its history as a result of his murder. Oh, our job on earth is to bring order out of chaos and turn bad things into good things. And I was hoping that the same thing would happen for our country after President Trump's, after the attempted assassination. And, I think he gave us some reason for hope at the outset. I'm not sure if it's holding.